Will you be working with him at that time?
No, I think we should have finished the film by then. I'll be working with him from March through the end of June or something like that.
Do you ever stop working?
Oh, God, yes. I sometimes don't do a picture for...
Everyone remembers the golden age as glamorous and pure. But Burt Lancaster, one of its biggest stars, once warned that behind the glitter was corruption, cruelty, and betrayal. According to him, some of Hollywood's most adored legends were anything but golden. And Lancaster didn't just speak in general. He pointed directly at the stars audiences worshipped. Names like Errol Flynn, Joan Crawford, and Clark Gable lit up the screen. But behind those iconic smiles were whispers of violence, manipulation, and ruthless ambition.
People take violence as the outcome, and violence is a very deep part of our society today.
Lancaster believed these weren't just flaws. They revealed something far darker about the industry's brightest names. And if you think that sounds shocking, wait until you hear how so-called friendships in Hollywood really worked. Behind the red carpets and champagne toasts, betrayal was everywhere. Lancaster saw it firsthand, friends who smiled at each other in public while scheming behind the scenes. The feud between Bette Davis and Joan Crawford wasn't just gossip. It was proof that loyalty in Hollywood was often a performance.
She was so jealous, so she wasn't very smart about what she did.
But even betrayal among friends wasn't the worst part. Hollywood's ugliest truths were carefully hidden from the public eye. Addiction, affairs, even violence, none of it ever made the headlines. Judy Garland was fed pills by MGM, her suffering hidden from fans.
This business of anybody implying that I'm either addicted to carpets or drinking or pills, I wouldn't have had time to learn a song.
Montgomery Clift battled demons while his pain was concealed. Lancaster hinted that cover-ups weren't rare. They were Hollywood's way of keeping the machine running. And Lancaster's final warning? It was the most chilling of all. Lancaster believed the actors loved most by audiences were often the ones hiding the darkest sides of all. From Marilyn Monroe's Exploitation to stars shielded by alliances, he warned that Hollywood's greatest legends might also have been its greatest villains.
They have to be able to rationalize to themselves that what they're doing is for an honest purpose. I think perhaps in all political assassinations, this is undeniably.
These are the secrets Burt Lancaster dared to expose, and today, we're pulling back the curtain. Before we dive in, make sure you subscribe and join us, because what you're about to hear will change the way you see Hollywood's golden age forever. Burt Lancaster wasn't just another Hollywood actor. He was a towering presence in both body and spirit. With his athletic frame and commanding voice, he became one of the biggest stars of Hollywood's golden age, often cast as heroes, rebels, and larger-than-life figures. But behind the charisma and fame was a man who refused to play by the rules of the studio system. Lancaster had a sharp tongue, a fiery temper, and a reputation for speaking the truth no matter how uncomfortable it was. Unlike many of his peers, Burt didn't chase approval from the powerful figures who ran Hollywood. He knew the darker side of the industry, the rivalries, the betrayals, the secret deals, and he never hesitated to call it out. That independence made him stand apart in an era when actors were often expected to stay quiet, look good, and keep the machine running. For Lancaster, silence was never an option. What made his perspective even more important was the fact that he had seen it all from the inside. He wasn't a tabloid journalist. He wasn't a bitter outsider. He was one of the biggest names in the business. When Lancaster hinted that certain actors carried a kind of evil with them, people paid attention. This was a man who had shared sets, contracts, and late-night Hollywood parties with legends whose faces were on every poster. His words carried the weight of personal experience, not distant speculation. Of course, that honesty came at a price. Lancaster earned plenty of admirers for his courage, but he also made lifelong enemies. Some actors and producers hated him for pulling back the curtain on their carefully managed images. Others simply feared that he might one day turn his fiery gaze on them. But Lancaster wasn't concerned about keeping friends in high places. He cared more about the truth than about Hollywood politics. And that's why his reputation matters. When a man like Burt Lancaster points to the dark side of Hollywood and warns about actors he believed were dangerous, it isn't idle gossip, it's testimony. His voice cut through the glamour and exposed the cracks in the golden age, setting the stage for some of the most shocking stories ever told about Hollywood's biggest icons. To understand why Burt Lancaster's accusations carried such weight, you first have to understand the world he lived in. The Hollywood of the 1940s and 1950s wasn't just about glitz and red carpets. Behind the flashing cameras and smiling actors was a machine run by power players who operated more like mob bosses than studio executives. These men and a few women controlled careers with a single phone call, decided who became a star and who disappeared into obscurity. The most infamous of them all was Louis B. Mayer, the legendary head of MGM. Mayer was worshipped publicly as a genius showman, but insiders whispered about his ruthless grip on actors' lives. It was said that he could make or break a career overnight, and no one dared to cross him. Lancaster often hinted that Mayer and other moguls treated stars less like artists and more like property. At the height of the studio system, actors signed contracts that gave studios absolute control over their image, their roles, and sometimes even their personal lives. Step out of line, and the bosses had ways to make you regret it. Some were quietly blacklisted, others were forced into roles that damaged their reputations with no way out. The worst of it? If you ended up on the wrong side of one of these powerful figures, your career and your reputation could be erased without explanation. This system created an environment where cruelty thrived. Some stars learned quickly that if they cozied up to the right people, they could wield that same power. A fake smile at a premiere could hide backroom betrayals, where rivals were sabotaged and humiliations carefully staged. Hollywood legends weren't just competing for awards. They were battling for survival in a cutthroat world where reputation was everything. Lancaster saw through it all. He wasn't blind to the way certain actors manipulated the system to stay on top. Some used their influence to pressure producers into cutting competitors out of films. Others developed reputations as untouchable, shielded by studio bosses, no matter how toxic their behavior. This was the Hollywood Burt Lancaster was talking about, a kingdom of smoke and mirrors where the most dangerous people weren't always behind the camera, but often in front of it. The ones with the biggest smiles and the brightest spotlights were sometimes the ones pulling strings in the shadows. And as Lancaster hinted, some of those so-called beloved stars had a side so dark, it would shock the fans who worshipped them. In Hollywood's golden age, competition wasn't just about who landed the best roles. It was war. Behind every glamorous smile on a movie poster, there was a bitter rivalry simmering in the background. Actors weren't just fighting for fame. They were fighting to survive in an industry where one wrong move could end a career. For some, this competition went far beyond professional jealousy. It turned into sabotage. There are countless stories of actors who would stop at nothing to eliminate their rivals. Some spread vicious rumors through the gossip columns, knowing full well that one scandal, true or not, could destroy a career overnight. Others pulled strings with studio heads, demanding their competition be written out of films or denied roles. This wasn't just playground bullying. It was career assassination, and it happened more often than fans realized. The most notorious example was the Bette Davis and Joan Crawford feud. What began as a clash of egos became one of Hollywood's ugliest rivalries, with both women accused of undermining each other's careers for decades. Gossip insiders whispered that Davis once celebrated when Crawford's projects flopped, while Crawford was rumored to spread stories to tarnish Davis's reputation. To audiences, they were legends of talent and elegance. To each other, they were mortal enemies. Burt Lancaster, who had his own share of rivals, despised the way such stars wore masks of charm in public, while stabbing their peers in the back in private. To him, this wasn't just ambition, it was evil. He believed that anyone who thrived on destroying others to advance themselves revealed a rotten core, no matter how beloved they appeared on screen. These rivalries didn't just play out in the press or in boardrooms. They spilled onto film sets too. Entire productions became battlegrounds, with actors refusing to share scenes, undermining each other's performances, or deliberately making life miserable for their co-stars. Behind the glossy publicity photos, tempers flared and grudges grew deeper. What shocked Lancaster most was how accepted it all was. The audience saw smiling faces at premieres, but the reality was far nastier. Some rivalries even turned into lifelong vendettas, whispered about for decades after. And while competition might be part of any business, in Hollywood's golden age, it often crossed the line into cruelty. For Lancaster, this was proof that beneath the glitter, some of his peers were far more dangerous than anyone dared admit. But even these bitter rivalries were only part of the story. Some actors went beyond sabotage. They used their charm to hide even darker secrets. One of the most unsettling truths about Hollywood's golden age is how many of its biggest stars lived double lives. On screen, they were heroes, lovers, and icons of grace. Off-screen, some of them were entirely different people, cruel, manipulative, and even dangerous. This contradiction is exactly what Burt Lancaster despised most: the ability of certain actors to project charm in public, while hiding darker tendencies behind the scenes. No one embodied this contradiction more than Errol Flynn. To fans, Flynn was the dashing swashbuckler, the ultimate Hollywood rogue who brought Robin Hood to life with unmatched charisma. But behind the cameras, stories of his temper, reckless behavior, and endless scandals followed him wherever he went. Whispers of late-night excesses, courtroom troubles, and mistreatment of those around him painted a far different picture than the hero audiences adored. To Lancaster, Flynn symbolized the danger of charm. It could blind the public while hiding the chaos underneath. And then there was Joan Crawford. A glamorous queen of Hollywood, Crawford carefully cultivated her image as a woman of strength and elegance. Yet behind the curtain, rumors spread of her ruthless ambition and the way she allegedly bullied younger actresses who threatened her throne. Stories circulated about her controlling nature on set, about co-stars reduced to tears under her icy glares. Whether all of it was true or exaggerated, Lancaster couldn't ignore the hypocrisy, how someone celebrated as a symbol of grace could wield cruelty as a weapon. Lancaster had no patience for this kind of duplicity. He respected honesty, even when it was harsh, but he could not stand performers who pretended to be saints in public while treating others with contempt in private. He believed that true evil wasn't just about bad behavior. It was about deception, about convincing the world you were something you were not. And the most chilling part? Hollywood rewarded this behavior. A star with a temper might still get their next role because audiences adored them and studios cared more about profits than morality. The bigger the smile, the easier it was to get away with bad behavior. For Lancaster, this made these actors truly dangerous. Their ability to charm the world while hiding their darkest traits meant they could fool millions. And that, in his eyes, was the very definition of evil. But even betrayal by strangers wasn't the worst of it. Hollywood's golden age also thrived on another kind of darkness: the betrayal of those closest to you. If there's one thing that cut deepest in Hollywood, it wasn't the critics or the studios. It was betrayal from those you trusted most. Friends, co-stars, and even lovers could quickly turn into enemies when fame and fortune were on the line. In an industry where opportunities were scarce and reputations fragile, loyalty often came second to ambition. And Burt Lancaster, who had his share of close friendships and bitter fallouts, saw betrayal as one of the cruelest forms of evil in Hollywood. Behind the dazzling smiles on the red carpet, friendships often carried hidden daggers. There are countless stories of actors who shared drinks after a premiere, only to discover weeks later that their so-called friend had whispered damaging rumors to a director or producer. Some performers would cozy up to a colleague, pretending to be allies, while secretly negotiating to steal roles out from under them. A legendary example came from outside Lancaster's circle, but was whispered all over Hollywood. The collapse of the partnership between Orson Welles and John Houseman. Once creative allies, their friendship crumbled into open hostility as egos and ambition got in the way. What began as collaboration turned into sabotage, with both men determined to cut the other down. To Lancaster, betrayals like this weren't just personal wounds. They revealed the darker truth of Hollywood itself. Loyalty was an illusion. For Lancaster, this kind of deceit was especially painful because it wasn't just about rivalry, it was personal. To stab a stranger in the back was one thing, but to betray someone who trusted you, who thought of you as a friend, was a level of cruelty that went beyond ambition. In his mind, it revealed the true darkness behind Hollywood's glamour. The idea that no relationship was sacred if fame was at stake. And the betrayals weren't limited to careers. Some stars manipulated personal relationships to climb higher, using lovers or friends as stepping stones before discarding them the moment they no longer proved useful. Hollywood was filled with broken partnerships and friendships that ended in bitterness, with careers and sometimes lives left in ruins. What made this so dangerous was how invisible it often was. Fans adored their favorite stars, believing in the image of camaraderie and family the studios pushed. But behind the curtain, betrayal was as common as applause. Lancaster once hinted that some of the people he considered the most evil weren't just cruel strangers. They were former friends who sold out their closest allies for power. And as bad as betrayal was, Hollywood's darkness didn't stop there. Behind the polished image of glamour lay a shadow few dared to acknowledge. Addiction, scandal, and cover-ups that threatened to bring the whole system crashing down. For all its glitz and glamour, Hollywood's golden age was drowning in secrets. Behind the flashing cameras and polished interviews, many of its brightest stars were battling personal demons. Addiction was rampant. Scandals lurked around every corner. And yet, thanks to the powerful studios, most of it never reached the public eye. Instead, audiences were sold a carefully crafted illusion of perfection, while the truth was buried beneath contracts, payoffs, and cover stories. No star embodied this tragedy more than Judy Garland. To fans, she was the wide-eyed Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, the girl who could sing her way into America's heart. But behind the scenes, MGM executives fed her pills to keep her awake for grueling shooting schedules, then handed her sleeping tablets when she needed to rest. It was a cruel cycle that led to a lifelong battle with substances, hidden from fans who only saw the smiling girl on screen. Lancaster often hinted that Hollywood's greatest crime wasn't just allowing such suffering, but deliberately fueling it in the name of profit. Then there was Montgomery Clift, a gifted actor whose vulnerability and intensity won over audiences. After a devastating car accident, he struggled with pain and dependency, his once brilliant career haunted by whispers of decline. To the public, Clift remained a brooding star. To insiders like Lancaster, he was a heartbreaking reminder of how easily Hollywood could chew up its talent and leave them broken. Alcohol and pills became lifelines for countless stars, pressured to stay flawless while enduring suffocating contracts and relentless press. Arrests vanished from police records, scandals disappeared from headlines, and the illusion of perfection continued. Lancaster saw how these cover-ups not only protected careers, but also enabled destructive behavior. The system didn't care about the human cost. It only cared about keeping the money machine running. And it wasn't just substance abuse. Affairs, violent outbursts, and even allegations of serious misconduct were silenced with hush money or threats. The darker the scandal, the more desperate studios became to protect their stars. To Lancaster, this culture of silence didn't just hide flaws, it rewarded them. But scandals weren't the only cruelty he noticed. For Lancaster, some of the darkest behavior came from the way powerful men treated the women who dared to share the spotlight. For all its shimmering elegance, Hollywood's golden age was an especially dangerous place for women. Actresses were adored on screen as goddesses of beauty and grace. But behind closed doors, many faced intimidation, manipulation, and outright cruelty from their male co-stars and the powerful men who ran the studios. To the public, it looked like these women lived lives of glamour. In reality, many were fighting simply to be treated with respect. Some actresses managed to push back. Katharine Hepburn, for example, became famous not just for her sharp wit and screen presence, but also for refusing to play by Hollywood's rules. She wore trousers when the studio wanted skirts, chose independence when they wanted obedience, and insisted on being seen as more than just a pretty face. Lancaster admired women like Hepburn, who stood their ground against domineering men and refused to be silenced. But for every Hepburn, there was a Marilyn Monroe, an actress adored by millions, but privately crushed under the weight of exploitation. Monroe was often cast as the glamorous blonde bombshell. Yet behind the cameras, she fought to be taken seriously while being controlled, manipulated, and discarded by powerful men who saw her more as a commodity than a person. Lancaster reportedly viewed Monroe's struggles as proof of Hollywood's ugliest truth. Women were celebrated as icons while being chewed up and spat out by the system that made them. Rumors spread of actresses reduced to tears on set, humiliated by egotistical leading men determined to dominate every scene. Others spoke of careers cut short not because of lack of talent, but because they refused to play the games dictated by executives and co-stars. These weren't just whispers. They were the hidden realities insiders like Lancaster witnessed daily. What made this cruelty even darker was the mask that covered it. To fans, the on-screen romances looked perfect, but behind the scenes, those same relationships were often filled with bullying, control, and exploitation. Lancaster believed these contradictions revealed the true rot of Hollywood, a place that worshipped women in public, yet destroyed them in private. But it wasn't just women who bore the brunt of Hollywood's cruelty. Lancaster himself had enemies, men he clashed with so bitterly that their feuds became the stuff of legend. Burt Lancaster was never one to bite his tongue, and in an industry built on fragile egos, that honesty earned him more than a few enemies. While many actors carefully crafted their public images to appear endlessly agreeable, Lancaster was a firebrand who spoke his mind, even if it meant calling out fellow stars. He respected talent, but he had no patience for arrogance, hypocrisy, or cruelty. And when someone crossed him, he rarely forgot it. One of his most famous clashes was with Kirk Douglas. The two men worked together on multiple films, including Gunfight at the OK Corral and 7 Days in May, and while their on-screen chemistry was electric, their off-screen relationship was stormy. Both were strong personalities, competitive to the core and quick to anger. Rumors swirled for years about their shouting matches on set, with each determined not to be overshadowed by the other. Lancaster may have respected Douglas's talent, but he bristled at his ego, and in return, Douglas was never shy about taking digs at Burt. Then there was Frank Sinatra. Lancaster and Sinatra famously appeared together in From Here to Eternity, but insiders whispered that Burt had little patience for Sinatra's attitude. He reportedly disliked Sinatra's arrogance and his tendency to lean on his off-screen connections, especially his rumored ties to powerful figures outside of Hollywood. Lancaster saw it as everything wrong with the industry, charm and connections being used as shields for bad behavior. These confrontations weren't just petty disputes. They exposed the darker underbelly of Hollywood's golden age. In Lancaster's eyes, some actors weren't merely difficult, they were dangerous, their ambition laced with malice. And because Lancaster wasn't afraid to expose them, he became a target himself. Rival actors spread their own stories about him, painting him as volatile or impossible to work with. It was the price he paid for refusing to stay silent. But Lancaster didn't care about being popular. He cared about truth. And in calling out his enemies, he revealed a disturbing reality: that some of Hollywood's brightest stars earned their power not through talent alone, but through manipulation and intimidation. And sometimes, those rivalries evolved into something even more sinister: alliances formed not to create art, but to destroy lives. If rivalries were dangerous, then alliances in Hollywood could be even worse. The Golden Age was not only shaped by individual egos, it was also dominated by cliques, secret partnerships, and unholy alliances between actors who banded together to protect their own power. To outsiders, these groups looked like harmless friendships, glamorous stars enjoying each other's company at parties or premieres. But inside the industry, everyone knew these alliances had teeth. These circles of influence could decide who thrived and who vanished. If you were welcomed into the right group, doors opened effortlessly, roles appeared. Directors suddenly took your calls, and critics seemed unusually kind. But if you found yourself on the wrong side of one of these alliances, your career could crumble almost overnight. Stories circulated of actors mysteriously dropped from projects, or quietly blacklisted after crossing one of these tight-knit power networks. Stars like Clark Gable and Spencer Tracy were often shielded by these alliances. Gable, the king of Hollywood, was beloved by fans, but insiders whispered that his reputation was polished by powerful studio executives who covered up his indiscretions. Tracy, meanwhile, was widely admired for his acting genius, but his struggles with alcohol were kept out of the spotlight thanks to friends in high places. Lancaster saw these protections not as loyalty, but as corruption proof that Hollywood cared more about preserving icons than holding them accountable. Even more disturbing was how these alliances often protected the worst behavior. If one member of the clique lashed out at a co-star or found themselves caught in a scandal, the group would rally to protect them, ensuring that the public never learned the truth. Loyalty within the alliance meant shielding each other from consequences, no matter how cruel or destructive the behavior might be. For Lancaster, this was the final piece of Hollywood's darkness. It wasn't just about individual egos or betrayals, but about entire networks of power dedicated to keeping the truth hidden. In his view, that kind of organized manipulation was the most dangerous evil of all. And when you put it all together, the rivalries, the betrayals, the cruelty, the cover-ups, it raised a haunting question. Was the golden age of Hollywood ever truly golden at all? When fans look back at Hollywood's golden age, they remember the dazzling premieres, the timeless films, and the larger-than-life stars who seemed to embody glamour itself. But as Burt Lancaster revealed, that image was only half the story. Beneath the glow of the spotlights was a world filled with rivalries that destroyed careers, betrayals that cut deeper than any script, and actors who wore charm like a mask while hiding cruelty in the shadows. The addictions, the cover-ups, the way women were exploited, the feuds that turned film sets into battlegrounds, all of it painted a much darker picture of the so-called golden years. Stars like Judy Garland were pushed into cycles of pills and exhaustion, while icons like Errol Flynn charmed audiences even as rumors of his reckless behavior spread behind the scenes. Joan Crawford, celebrated for her elegance, was whispered about as ruthless and intimidating, while Marilyn Monroe became the ultimate symbol of how Hollywood adored its women in public, but chewed them up in private. Lancaster's honesty forced people to confront the uncomfortable truth. Some of the stars audiences adored were not heroes at all, but manipulators, bullies, and opportunists who thrived on the downfall of others. And yet, perhaps that is why his words still matter today. He wasn't an outsider whispering gossip from the sidelines. He was one of Hollywood's biggest names, a man who stood shoulder to shoulder with the very people he accused. He saw through the illusion and he had the courage to say out loud what others only dared to think. The legacy of old Hollywood will always shine with nostalgia, but Lancaster's perspective reminds us that behind every glamorous image, there may be secrets the public was never meant to know. The Golden Age was not just about art and beauty. It was about power, control, and survival in a world that rewarded cruelty as often as it celebrated talent. So the next time you watch one of those classic films and see a beloved star smiling on screen, remember what Burt Lancaster warned: the brightest lights often cast the darkest shadows. And if you think we missed a name, or if you've heard whispers of other Hollywood icons with dark sides, drop it in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from behind the curtain of Hollywood's history.